Aisha had always been a dreamer. Growing up in Lagos, she spent hours sketching dresses in her old notebooks, imagining women walking proudly in her design. Even after marriage, that dream never left her. Between cooking and cleaning, she would sit by the window late at night, her laptop open, searching for fabric suppliers and watching tutorials on fashion design. She wanted to start her own brand one day, something beautiful that carried her name. But Bayo, her husband, didn't share that vision. Whenever she talked about her plans, he would laugh. "You're wasting your time," he'd say, shaking his head. "Real wives stay home and take care of their husband." His words stung, but Aisha tried to brush them off. She told herself he would understand one day. She did everything to make him happy, waking up early to prepare his favorite meals, keeping the house spotless, and supporting his job even when he came home late. But no matter how hard she tried, Bayo only grew colder. He would mock her small sewing projects, calling them childish hobbies. Sometimes he'd ignore her completely, scrolling through his phone while she talked about a new idea. At night, when the house grew quiet, Aisha would stare at her sketches and whisper to herself, "One day." She didn't know how or when, but deep down, she believed her dreams mattered. She just needed the courage to prove it, first to herself, then to the world. The family gathering was supposed to be a happy one. Aisha had spent the whole morning helping Bayo's mother in the kitchen, preparing jollof rice and pepper soup, smiling even when her feet ached. She wanted to make a good impression, to show that she respected her husband's family. When everyone finally sat down to eat, the room buzzed with laughter and loud conversations. Aisha thought, just for a moment, that things might be peaceful. Then it happened. Bayo's uncle asked him when they planned to have children, and Bayo laughed. "How can I have children with a woman who doesn't act like a wife?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The table went quiet. Aisha froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean?" his cousin asked, curious. Bayo leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Aisha thinks she's too smart for housework. Always talking about business and fashion, like she's one of those women on TV. She's not wife material. She just talks too much." The words hit Aisha like a slap. She looked down, her throat tightening. She hoped someone would speak up for her, but instead, Bayo's mother laughed. "It's true," she said, shaking her head. "These modern girls want to compete with men. A wife should know her place." The other women giggled, whispering to each other. Aisha felt her cheeks burn. She forced a small smile, pretending she didn't care, but inside she was breaking. Her food turned cold as she listened to more jokes at her expense. Every word chipped away at her confidence. Every laugh felt like a knife. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She quietly pushed her chair back and stood up. "Excuse me," she said softly, avoiding everyone's eyes. She walked away from the table, her heart pounding. No one tried to stop her. Outside, she stood under the dim porch light, blinking back tears. The evening air was cool, but her face felt hot. She heard the laughter still coming from inside, and something inside her shifted. It wasn't anger, it was resolve. She realized then that no matter what she did, it would never be enough for them. She could cook, clean, and smile all day, and they'd still see her as not wife material. That night, as she looked up at the dark sky, Aisha made herself a quiet promise. She would no longer beg to be seen. She would build a life that spoke for her. One day they would remember this moment, not for how they laughed at her, but for how she walked away with her head held high. And deep down, for the first time, she wasn't just dreaming. She was deciding. A few weeks after the family gathering, Aisha finally gathered the courage to talk to Bayo about her business idea. She had spent nights researching, calculating costs, and sketching design. She wasn't asking for much, just a small amount to buy fabrics and a sewing machine. She waited until after dinner, hoping he'd be in a good mood. "Bayo," she began carefully, "I've been thinking, maybe I could start my own design business. I already have a few clients interested. I just need a little money to get started." He looked up from his phone and frowned. "Business again? Aisha, when will you stop with this nonsense?" "It's not nonsense," she said quietly. "I've been working hard on this. I believe it can grow." Bayo let out a short, cold laugh. "You think you can run a business? No man wants a woman who competes with him. You should be focused on your home, not chasing fantasies." His words sliced through her. "It's not about competing," she tried to explain. "It's about doing something for myself, something I love." He slammed his phone on the table. "Enough, Aisha." I said no. "You're embarrassing me with all this talk. What will people say when they see my wife running around like a market woman?" She stood there in silence, staring at him. The man she once loved looked like a stranger. She had given him everything, her time, her care, her loyalty, and all she got in return was disrespect. That night, when he went to bed, she sat alone in the living room, her sketches spread out in front of her. Tears blurred the pages, but beneath the pain, something fierce started to grow. She realized she had been waiting for his permission to live her own life, and that was her mistake. By morning, she made her decision. She quietly packed her laptop, her sketchbooks, and a few clothes into a small bag. She didn't take jewelry or anything expensive, just the things that represented her dreams. As she zipped the bag, her hands trembled, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. Before leaving, she looked around the house one last time. The framed wedding photo on the wall showed two smiling faces full of hope. She almost didn't recognize herself. "I'll make it," she whispered to her reflection in the mirror. "And one day you'll regret this." When the sun began to rise, Aisha walked out of that house quietly, closing the door behind her. She didn't know where she would go or how she would start, but for the first time, she felt free. What she carried wasn't just a bag, it was a promise to herself. She would build the life she deserved, no matter what it took. Aisha arrived in Abuja with nothing but her small bag and a heart full of fear and hope. The city felt bigger than she remembered, loud, crowded, and fast. She rented a tiny room in a rundown building at the edge of town. The paint on the walls was peeling, the window barely closed, and at night she could hear traffic from the street below. But to her, it was freedom. It was hers. She spent her days looking for work and her nights sketching designs under a dim bulb that flickered every few minutes. After a week of searching, she found a small tailor's shop willing to rent her a corner space and a sewing machine. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She'd sit there for hours, stitching clothes for customers who often bargained too hard or paid late. Still, every dress she made carried her heart in its fabric. Some days were brutal. There were times she went to bed hungry because she had spent her last naira on fabric. Sometimes clients rejected her designs or complained about prices, making her question if she had made the right choice. But whenever she felt like giving up, she remembered Bayo's words. "No man wants a woman who competes." That memory pushed her harder. She wanted to prove that a woman could stand on her own. Her neighbor, Mama Chica, was the first person to truly see her. She was a cheerful older woman who sold food by the roadside. One evening, she knocked on Aisha's door with a plate of jollof rice. "My daughter," she said kindly, "you look tired. Eat something." From that day, they became friends. Whenever Aisha came home late from the shop, exhausted and covered in fabric threads, Mama Chica would be waiting outside her door. "You're working too hard," she'd tease, smiling. "But don't worry, they'll call you boss one day." Aisha would laugh, even when she was too tired to smile. "Boska? I just need customers first," she'd reply. But slowly, her hard work started to pay off. A few clients noticed her unique design, how she mixed traditional fabrics with modern cuts. Word began to spread around the neighborhood. One woman told her friend, who told another, and soon Aisha started getting small but steady orders. She saved every little profit, bought better fabrics, and began to dream again. Late at night, she'd sit by her sewing machine, music playing softly in the background, and whisper to herself, "One day, they'll know my name." Life was still tough. She still cried some nights, still struggled to pay rent, but now she had purpose. Every stitch, every sleepless night, was a step toward the woman she was becoming. Aisha was no longer just surviving. She was building. One afternoon, as Aisha was finishing a customer's dress, she received a call that made her pause mid-stitch. It was from a local event planner she'd met weeks earlier. The woman said there was going to be a small fashion show in Abuja, and they were looking for new designers to showcase their work. At first, Aisha hesitated. She didn't feel ready. She had no fancy team, no sponsors, just her sewing machine, some fabric, and big dreams. But then she remembered all the nights she'd stayed up sewing until sunrise. This was her chance. She said yes. For the next 2 weeks, Aisha barely slept. Her tiny room turned into a workshop. Fabric piled up on the floor, pins scattered everywhere, and empty cups of tea filled the table. She designed 5 unique pieces, each one bold, colorful, and full of personality. She wanted them to tell her story, a woman who refused to give up. The day of the show arrived. Aisha stood backstage, hands shaking as models wore her designs down the runway. The lights were blinding, the music loud, but all she could hear was her heartbeat. When the audience gasped at her final outfit, a flowing gown made from ankara and silk, she almost cried. For the first time, people weren't laughing at her dreams. They were clapping for them. After the show, one of the judges, a well-known fashion investor named Mr. Ade, approached her. "You designed these?" he asked, impressed. Aisha nodded nervously. He smiled and said, "You have something special. I'd like to work with you." That moment changed everything. Within a few months, with Mr. Ade's guidance, Aisha officially launched her brand, Zaya Couture, named after her childhood nickname. She started an Instagram page, posting pictures of her design. The response was overwhelming. People loved her mix of tradition and modern style. Orders started pouring in, first from Abuja, then from Lagos, then from outside Nigeria. Aisha could hardly believe it. The same hands that once sewed clothes for survival were now creating fashion for celebrities and influencers. She moved into a small studio, hired 2 assistants, and bought her own sewing machine. Every morning, she walked into her workspace and smiled, remembering the days she worked from a tiny room with flickering lights. One evening, while scrolling through her phone, she saw her brand tagged in a viral post. A popular stylist had worn one of her dresses to a red carpet event. Comments flooded in. Who designed this? Zaya Couture is the next big thing. Aisha put her hand over her mouth, tears welling up. She thought of Mama Chica's words. They'll call you boss one day. And now they were. It wasn't just a win at a fashion show. It was the moment Aisha stepped into the life she had always imagined. The dreamer had finally become the designer the world was watching. 2 years later, Aisha's life looked nothing like the one she had left behind. What started in a tiny rented room had become one of the fastest-growing fashion brands in Africa. Zaya Couture now had boutiques in Abuja, Lagos, Accra, and Nairobi. Her designs were worn by actresses, politicians' wives, and even international models. The same girl who once begged for fabric money now had employees calling her Madam Aisha. Every morning, she arrived at her main studio, a bright, glass-fronted building with her name proudly displayed on top. Cameras often waited outside to capture a glimpse of her. Magazines called her Nigeria's rising fashion queen. Interviews, photo shoots, and invitations poured in nonstop. Aisha handled them all with quiet grace. She hadn't forgotten where she came from. Her story had gone viral across social media. People admired her for turning pain into power. Young women wrote to her, saying she inspired them to chase their dream. She would often smile reading those messages late at night, remembering the lonely days she thought she wouldn't make it. Meanwhile, far away in Lagos, Bayo's life was falling apart. His once promising business had crumbled after a series of bad deals. Debts piled up, and clients stopped trusting him. He tried to keep up appearances, but his phone barely rang anymore. The confidence he used to wear like armor had disappeared. One afternoon, as he sat in traffic on 3rd Mainland Bridge, something caught his eye, a giant billboard featuring Aisha. She stood tall in a flowing gold gown, the words beside her reading, Zaya Couture, redefining African elegance. For a moment, Bayo couldn't breathe. The woman on that billboard looked like a queen. Confident, powerful, free. He remembered the nights he told her she was wasting her time. The insults, the laughter, the way she used to look at him, hoping he'd see her potential. And now there she was, proof that she never needed his approval. Bayo sat in silence, gripping the steering wheel as cars honked behind him. He thought about calling her, but he couldn't. What would he even say? That he was sorry? That he was proud? The truth was, he wasn't sure what hurt more, losing her, or realizing she had become everything he said she couldn't be. Back in Abuja, Aisha stood in front of her team, reviewing new designs. Her phone buzzed with another feature request from an international magazine. She smiled, not out of pride but gratitude. Every struggle, every tear, every late night had led her here. She didn't know that at that exact moment, miles away, Bayo was staring at her billboard with regret burning in his chest. Life had come full circle, and this time, she was the one who shined while he faded into the background. The ballroom glowed with golden lights, the air filled with soft music and the quiet chatter of Abuja's elite. It was one of those high-profile business events where CEOs, investors, and celebrities mingled, hoping to make new connections. Aisha stood near the stage, surrounded by people eager to meet her. She looked stunning in a fitted emerald gown from her own collection, her confidence radiating effortlessly. Cameras flashed as she smiled for photos, her name now spoken with admiration and respect. Across the room, Bayo walked in wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. He had received a last-minute invite through a friend who didn't know his full story. He wasn't supposed to be there, but when he heard that Aisha would be attending, something pulled him in. He told himself it was just curiosity, but deep down it was guilt and longing. When he finally spotted her, his breath caught. She didn't look like the Aisha he once knew. This woman stood tall, surrounded by success, moving with grace and power. For a moment, he thought about leaving, but pride wouldn't let him. He straightened his tie and walked toward her, heart pounding. Aisha was mid-conversation with a group of investors when she noticed him approaching. For a split second, her chest tightened, but she quickly composed herself. Gone was the nervous wife who once sought his approval. She was in control now. Bayo, she said calmly, her tone polite but distant. He smiled awkwardly. Aisha, wow. You've changed. His voice trembled slightly. I mean, look at you. You're everywhere now. I've been following your work. I'm proud of you. She nodded with a faint smile. Thank you. I've been working hard. There was an awkward pause. He tried to make small talk, pretending like old wounds didn't exist. You always had talent, he said quickly. I guess I just didn't see it then. Aisha tilted her head slightly, her smile unwavering. Yes, you didn't. Her voice was calm, not bitter, just honest. He looked down, embarrassed. Around them, photographers and business people continued to greet her, calling her Madame Zaya. Every time someone approached, Bayo stepped back a little more, realizing how far apart their worlds had become. "So, maybe we could catch up sometime?" he asked quietly, trying to sound casual. Aisha looked at him kindly but firmly. "I don't think that's necessary, Bayo. I wish you well, truly. But tonight, I'm here for business." She turned to greet another guest, her attention no longer on him. The conversation was over, though she had never raised her voice or shown anger. Her silence spoke volumes. Bayo stood there for a moment, watching her laugh and network, completely in her element. For the first time, he saw her as she truly was, a woman who didn't need him, never did, and had risen far beyond his reach. As he walked away, shoulders heavy, Aisha took a deep breath and smiled to herself. The tables had turned, and she didn't even need revenge. Her success had already spoken for her. It was a bright Monday morning at the Zaya Couture headquarters in Abuja. The office buzzed with life, sewing machines humming, staff moving around with fabric samples, and clients arriving for fittings. Aisha sat in her glass office, reviewing new designs, her calm focus commanding quiet respect. She had built this empire from nothing, and every corner of the studio was a reminder of how far she'd come. Then her assistant rushed in, looking uneasy. "Ma," she said softly, "there's a man outside asking to see you. He says his name is Bayo." Aisha froze for a moment, then looked up slowly. The name still carried memories, but not the same kind of pain it once did. "Let him in," she said, her voice steady. When Bayo walked in, everyone in the office went silent. He looked nothing like the proud man she once knew. His suit was wrinkled, his face tired, and his eyes full of regret. He stopped when he saw her, elegant, confident, seated behind her desk like a woman in control of her world. "Aisha," he began quietly, his voice cracking. "You look amazing." She didn't smile. "What do you want, Bayo?" He took a deep breath. "I came to say I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I didn't see your potential back then. I was blind, stupid, proud." His words tumbled out in a rush. "I see you now, everything you've achieved. You're incredible. And I just want another chance." The room stayed silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. A few staff members peeked through the glass, pretending to work, but unable to look away. Aisha leaned back in her chair, calm and composed. "Another chance?" she repeated slowly. "After everything?" Bayo nodded desperately. "Please, Aisha. I've lost everything. The business, the house. I miss you. I miss us. You were the best thing that ever happened to me." Before anyone could react, he dropped to his knees right there on the office floor. "Please," he whispered, tears in his eyes. "Forgive me. Let's start over. I'll do better this time." Gasps echoed from the doorway. The man who once mocked her dreams was now begging in front of her staff. Aisha looked down at him, not with anger, but with deep understanding. She had cried for him once. But now she felt nothing but peace. Slowly, she stood up and walked around her desk until she stood in front of him. "Bayo," she said softly but firmly, "you wanted a perfect wife. I became the perfect woman, without you." He looked up at her, speechless, tears streaming down his face. She turned to her assistant. "Please show Mr. Bayo out." As the doors closed behind him, Aisha walked back to her desk, her heels clicking confidently against the marble floor. The office was quiet again, but her staff looked at her with newfound admiration. She didn't just win success, she won herself back. After that day at Aisha's office, Bayo's life fell apart completely. Word spread quickly about what had happened, how the once proud husband had shown up at his ex-wife's company, kneeling on the floor and begging for forgiveness. At first, people didn't believe it, but soon, photos and whispers began to circulate. Friends avoided him, business partners stopped calling, and even his own family grew distant. He became a man everyone pitied, the one who mocked his wife, only to watch her rise higher than he ever imagined. He tried to rebuild his business, but nothing worked. Every deal seemed to fall through, every opportunity slipped away. The same arrogance that once made him feel powerful now isolated him. He would scroll through social media at night, seeing Aisha's face on magazine covers, smiling confidently at fashion events across the world. Each post was a reminder of what he had lost. Not just a woman, but someone who had believed in him even when he didn't believe in her. Meanwhile, Aisha's life was moving in a completely different direction. Success had not hardened her, it had deepened her purpose. She started using her platform to help other women like her, women who had been told they weren't wife material or that their dreams didn't matter. She launched a foundation that supported women entrepreneurs, providing small grants and training programs. At every event, she spoke from the heart, sharing her story without bitterness, only strength. "Believe in yourself," she would tell the audience, "even if no one else does." Especially then, her story inspired thousands. Young girls quoted her words online, calling her the woman who turned pain into power. She visited schools, hosted workshops, and sponsored girls who wanted to learn fashion design. She made it her mission to remind women that they didn't need permission to shine. One afternoon, as Aisha attended a charity gala, she overheard two women whispering nearby. "Did you hear about Bayo?" one said. "He's living in a small flat now. No business, no car. Nothing." The other woman sighed. "God works in mysterious ways. The man who used to laugh at her is now the one everyone laughs at." Aisha didn't react. She didn't need revenge. Life had already taught its own lesson. Later that night, as she sat alone in her office overlooking the city lights, she thought about everything she had been through. The pain, the struggle, the lonely nights, and how it all shaped her into who she was. She closed her laptop and smiled quietly to herself. She didn't win to prove him wrong. She won to prove herself right. Somewhere in Lagos, Bayo sat in a dim room, staring at a newspaper headline that read, "Aisha Bello empowers 1,000 women across Africa." He lowered the paper slowly, his eyes heavy with regret. The final lesson had been written, and this time, he was just a footnote in her story. The night was electric. Paris Fashion Week, the biggest stage of Aisha's career. The lights, the music, the sea of cameras, it all felt unreal. As her models walked down the runway in her latest Zaya Couture collection, the crowd gasped and applauded. The designs shimmered under the spotlights, bold, elegant, and full of African pride. Every stitch told her story, from the girl who once cried alone in a tiny room to the woman who now ruled the runway. When Aisha stepped out at the end of the show, the entire hall rose to their feet. Cameras flashed from every direction, capturing her radiant smile. She looked breathtaking, calm, strong, and finally free. The host handed her the microphone, and the crowd fell silent, waiting for her to speak. Aisha took a deep breath and smiled softly. "They once said I wasn't wife material," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I learned I was built for more. For strength. For purpose. For every woman who has ever been told she's not enough, this is for you." The audience erupted in applause, cheering and clapping as her name echoed through the hall. Tears glistened in Aisha's eyes, but they were tears of victory, not pain. Somewhere far away, in a small living room in Lagos, Bayo sat watching the show on TV. The same woman he once belittled now stood before the world, shining brighter than ever. He lowered his head slowly, realizing the truth. The woman he had thrown away had become everything he was not: brave, powerful, unstoppable. On that stage, with the world watching, Aisha smiled one last time. She had come full circle, not to prove anyone wrong, but to show that she was always meant to rise.